Hello, NAIFA, Colorado. This is Carl Larson, and I'm bringing you your NAIFA, Colorado Regional Spotlight today. And joining us is Tyler Laughlin, the Regional Vice President of State Relations with ACLI. Welcome, Tyler.
Thanks for having me, Carl.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, give us some of your background and how you ended up here?
Sure, I'd love to. Well, thanks for having me, and thanks and hello to all of the NAIFA Colorado folks. You guys have great representation with Carl, and it's been a joy to get to work with him, albeit briefly, since I started with ACLI in October of 2019. I joined ACLI late last year after serving almost 7 years at the Oklahoma Insurance Department. I served under 2 elected insurance commissioners, most recently the current insurance commissioner, Glenn Mulready, who was elected in 2018. I served as his transition chair in November, December, January, and led his transition into his new term, which started January of 2019. Finished at the Oklahoma Insurance Department as the chief of staff and first deputy, where we had roughly 125 employees, give or take a few here or there, at any given time, and about a $15.5 million budget. And so we oversaw that. And we had roughly 77 domestic insurance companies domiciled in the state of Oklahoma. And really, during my 6.5 to 7 years of service at the Oklahoma Insurance Department, I got to know few of the folks at ACLI through work that I did at the NAIC, and folks there are just wonderful. They're bright, very engaged, very talented group of individuals, and just really kind of fortunate to get to work for ACLI, and just a great organization, as is NAIFA, and had some great interaction with NAIFA while I was a regulator as well. But before that, I was at the Oklahoma Attorney General's office working on legislative matters and serving our Attorney General. Ran his 2010 campaign, and it's been that long, for State Attorney General. And then prior to that, I worked for a member of Congress here in Oklahoma, who for a period of time and shortly right after I left, he was ag chairman in the House of Representatives, U.S. House of Representatives. So, and I guess before that, I was in the University of Oklahoma studying finance and got my bachelor's in finance in 2008 when the whole banking crisis unfolded. And so while this is much, 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 much bigger, the COVID-19 is certainly bringing back some of those memories from whenever I got out of college. But anyway, that's a little bit about me and a little bit background on my history with insurance and regulatory aspect and professional background. So,
well, that's a very impressive resume and quite extensive experience. You're certainly well suited for this role. So let's talk a little bit about this grassroots partnership that ACLI and NAIFA has, and tell us a little bit about how that came to be and what you see as going forward.
Yeah, so ACLI and NAIFA nationally joined forces probably late last year, and this year have been working together legislatively across the state in 7 key states, partner states that we're working on joint issues together. And those states are California, Colorado, Florida, Illinois, Massachusetts, Maryland, and New Jersey. And really, it's a lot of the same issues that we are fighting in those legislatures or pushing for in those legislatures are synonymous with many of the issues that you and your members are interested in. State retirement obviously is a huge one, and that's certainly been a key component of our efforts, our grassroots efforts thus far. it was very successful in a lot of the work that we did with NAIFA in Massachusetts. Um, and I know that work will continue. We were just about to get started in Colorado, and the legislature, obviously, as you guys know, is temporarily suspended, but talks are ongoing, and our partnership lives on, and I think it will, because our issues are aligned, our interests are aligned on so many areas, including the temporary producer license issue that we've recently been talking together about with a few of your members in the department. So we look forward to that relationship continuing to grow. And as we test these 7 states, we would love and I think would encourage that partnership in more than just those states, because I think that is actually occurring in more than just those 7 states.
Yes, indeed. Well, let's talk a little bit about this temporary producer license issue, and have other states done this already, and how big of a hurdle has it been? Where do you see this going in Colorado?
Yeah. Well, so I think there was a joint letter that we signed along with NAIFA. It's a joint trade letter, ACLI, AALU, Gamma, NAIFA, and NAILPA. All sent a joint trade letter to the state regulatory officials across the country on April 1st. We were essentially asking that there be temporary accommodations allowed for what we're calling a bridge license. Temporary license is a term that most departments, in fact, all departments are familiar with. Some departments currently have statutes that allow for them to issue temporary licenses, like Texas. And so when this letter first went out, Texas was one of the first states to essentially recognize their statute that allows for a temporary license. And they went a little bit further and made it just a little easier to acquire a temporary license through a bulletin that they issued. Prior to the letter going out, I believe there were only about 4 other states besides Texas that had acted on offering a temporary license: Louisiana, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and West Virginia. Fortunately, 3 of the states, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and Texas, are all within my 5-state region that I cover for ACLI. And so Nebraska and Oklahoma, they did allow for a temporary license. But I think what's important is as these departments are considering temporary licensure, it's something that we focused on as regulators. We got to make sure that the consumer is protected. And, many of your members do, and certainly our members do. And I know the regulators are focused on that. And so the joint trade letter that we, along with NAIFA, sent in to the state officials highlighted that need, the need to protect the consumers. And so as we saw a lot of the third-party testing centers closed and fingerprinting processing places closed, we felt it was important to pin the letter that highlighted the need for a temporary license, but with certain consumer protections. Those consumer protections that we thought needed to be included in there would be of the following. Essentially, the license would expire after a certain period of time. So the temporary license would not be indefinite. Bridge license would actually expire, and that the commissioner could allow them to have and require them to take a test once that operation is back up and running or after expiration. The second protection is that the temporary licensee would be appointed to a sponsoring insurer, and the appointment would be for the duration of that temporary license. And we think that's important because if the insurer is ultimately responsible for the temporary licensee, then the consumer is in a better position to ensure that they have the documents and required disclosures and proper protections that are currently contemplated through a regular licensing structure. The other third protection that we thought was important was that the carrier must sponsor the agent that's eligible for the temporary license. This wouldn't require the agent to be an employee of the insurance company, but it would require the carrier to sponsor the agent that's eligible for the temporary license. And again, ties it back to just making sure that there's some skin in the game to protect both the consumer and the carrier. Uh, so we think that is obviously a needed protection, which is why we highlighted in the letter. The fourth thing that we put in there, the sponsoring carrier must confirm that the applicant for temporary licensing has completed all the state required training and coursework. And I think that one sort of speaks for itself. The next one is we thought that the background check should be initiated by the carrier. Most departments do this anyway. In fact, all departments do that anyway as part of a producer licensing. Best practice is they do a background check on the applicant before they issue the licensee or the license. But in a lot of the states, they also require fingerprinting, and that fingerprinting drives the background check and is sort of tied to the background check. And we thought it was important for the carrier to assist the department in this and initiate the background check for those temporary licensees. So anyway, those are a few of the items. There are probably a couple more in the letter, but those are certainly some of the items that we thought were necessary for departments to consider as they issue temporary license that balance both the need to have carriers responding to consumer demands, but also those protections in there to make sure that consumers were protected whenever they were being marketed and sold certain products.
Sure. Well, and as Colorado is facing a $2 to $3 billion revenue shortfall, and state resources are stretched thin and probably going to be stretched thinner, do you see this proposal as taking away some of the heavy lift that the division has to do in order to issue a license in a normal circumstance?
So is your question on whether this would be more difficult to process the temporary license versus a regular license?
Yes.
Well, it's hard to speak for any individual insurance department. But it all depends on how they currently process current licenses, how they process temporary licenses. I know at my previous job, they are handling the temporary licenses through paper. They're being mailed to the office, and then they're going to be entered into a scan and then emailed to the appropriate staff. And so there's a few extra hurdles in there. And it would appear as if there'd be some more hands-on as staff are trying to handle some of the temporary licenses. But again, that would be too tough for me to call, since I have no working knowledge of how the departments are run in every individual state.
Well, during this time of remote work and the COVID shutdown, are you seeing more or less demand for the products and services that our industry has to offer?
Well, I think the demand's there, and right, wrong, or indifferent, it's there, and it's our goal to try to meet the demands of the consumers and serve them the best that we can, in the most appropriate way that we can. And so that's why you've seen such a push for the temporary licensure across the country. And since we sent the letter on April 1st, today's the middle of April 20th, and we've seen, I think, to date about 12 to 14 states allow for a temporary license. But I think what's also very interesting throughout all of this is the test centers that facilitate a lot of these licensing services. They've all unanimously closed down, right? And so that has certainly put the states and the industries in a position where they're having to ask for a temporary license. And so, that's really kind of what has led to a lot of these closures of licensing operations of departments, is the lack of the ability to test. And I think a lot of those test facilities are coming back online slowly but surely. But they're coming back up, and that's encouraging. So
Absolutely. So do you see any permanent changes from the impacts of this COVID-19 shutdown within the industry? Are the carriers looking to operate differently on an ongoing basis, or are the changes that we're seeing temporary as we assume that the impacts of the shutdown are?
well, Carl, I'm not trying to dodge the question, but I do think it's too early to tell. I think that we're still right in the middle of this thing, and it's going to be hard to tell whether this permanently impacts the carriers and the way they operate or not. I would personally assume that it will in some form or fashion, but it also may impact the way that regulators collect information and regulate. Is there going to be some sort of modernization effort going forward after this? Do we need wet signatures and on all every form filing? I don't know, but those are some of the questions and issues that I think will come out of this once the dust settles and once we return to a life of normalcy. But we're still kind of in the middle of this, and it's a little bit tough to tell at this point what the permanent effect of this is going to be. But I got to imagine it's going to have some sort of permanent effect on all of us.
Sure. Well, and I think there's probably going to be a a new body of law that crops up around these issues, and Colorado has been working on remote notary bills for the past 4 years now, and trying to make some accommodations for this remote signature gathering and verification. And there's been some pushback here, but I think that this issue could certainly be expanded in light of this shutdown, and where we are seeing more of a virtual interaction between agents and their clients in the regulatory industry.
Yeah, I think so. And I like to see the bright side and everything. I'm a guy that lives on the sunshine side of the mountain, and I'd like to think that this has obviously put us and many people in a position to adapt to technological demands, and it's how we respond to those demands during this time that will give the flexibility going forward. And so, I think that it's assuming everybody can respond positively to these changes, better position us to have those kind of discussions at Capitol and with other lawmakers across the country on how to sort of permanently modernize how we do business. And you bring up a great point about the remote notarizations. It's something that we had mentioned in a letter to all the regulators back in early March, was this notary accommodation that is challenging whenever everybody's working remotely, and whenever you've got a social distance, it makes it difficult to go track down a notary. But again, this all goes back to, I think that the insurance industry is going to respond well. I think that everybody's going to be pleasantly supportive and appreciative of how the industry responds during these challenging times. So I think it'll speak very favorably on us as we move forward.
Well, that's great, Tyler. I appreciate your time very much. You've been listening to Tyler Laughlin with ACLI, and this has been your NAIFA Colorado Spotlight.